Hi everyone, so this is just a revision video to help you to go over the coasts. Obviously we studied this in class, but you can use this to revise over the topic whenever you want at your own pace. Watch it as many times and you can pause it. So I really hope this helps. So as we know, the coasts are so exposed, they're exposed to the sea, the big waves coming in, the stronger the wind, the higher the waves. So they're really open to a lot of erosion because that power of the water of the waves will crash against the rock on the coastline and erode it. Okay, but it can also make the waves coming in can be very calm and they can deposit material when they slow down. So we'll go through all of that. Okay, so very quickly, the swash is the frothy water that moves up the shore. So that's that frothy water as the waves coming in past your ankles, and that's stronger. Okay, comes in, it rushes in past your feet. When that water is going back out to sea, that's called a backwash, so that's weaker, okay? Right, destructive waves happen in stormy weather, as you can see in the next picture. They're high, there's a strong wind blowing over the surface of the water in the ocean, so it's picking up big waves. So they're stormy waves, they will erode, okay? And then you have constructive waves, they are calmer. So they're found in calm weather, they're small, they're slowing down, they'll deposit material, okay? The processes of how do the waves actually erode the rock along the coastline? Well, they erode it through hydraulic action, compressed air, abrasion, attrition. So if I just go to that picture there that you can see in front of you, what is hydraulic action? It's so simple. As the waves crash against the coastline, the power of those waves, the force of the waves hitting off of the rock, knocks off chunks and pieces of rock. So that's erosion. The second one that we looked at there was compressed air. If it's very stormy and the waves are continuously crashing against the rock, air can sometimes get trapped inside in the cracks in the rock because it's one wave after another belting off of the rock. And if air gets trapped inside in the rock, in the cracks, air will build up. If it can't escape, it will keep building up and it will expand and it will explode and shatter the rock. So that's more erosion. Abrasion is when the broken up pieces of rock are now carried by the waves and the waves hurl them against the rock, against the coastline, and they break off more chunks of rock. And attrition is just the pieces of rocks carried by the waves and the stones, because they're constantly hurled against the coastline and they hit off of each other in the water, they get smoothened and worn down as well. So you have a lot of erosion happening by the load carried by the waves and the rock along the coastline that the waves are hitting against. Okay, so if the waves are constantly hitting off of the coastline, what landforms are the waves carving out? What features are carving out for itself? Well, the first obvious one is a cliff. Okay, and we've studied this. So very quickly, a bit of revision. What is a cliff? It's a vertical or a steep slope along the coastline. As you can see, the cliffs of Moher and the photos there. So it's a very steep cliff. It's a very steep slope, vertical. Okay, so how is it formed? As the waves crash against the coastline, the waves typically normally attack the rock at the bottom of the coastline. Okay, so they keep attacking the rock at the base of the headland, we'll say, and they erode a notch out of that rock, as you can see in the next picture. Okay, as this continues, the rock above, the overhanging rock above the notch, has nothing now anymore to support it. So that will eventually collapse into the sea. That leaves a very steep face, a very steep slope, and we call that a cliff. As erosion continues, the cliff is going to keep getting eroded back and back and back, and that forms, that means that the cliff is retreating, it's moving backwards. Now, obviously, that takes thousands and thousands of years for the erosion to keep moving the cliff back and back and back. As you can see, the former start where the cliff used to be, out much, much further, it has been eroded back quite a distance. So you can still see the floor or the former base of the cliff. That former base of the cliff is called a wave-cut platform. You can see it in one of the pictures here. So you can see where the cliff used to be out much further out into the sea and how far back it has been eroded. Okay, so that's a cliff and a wave-cut platform, and your example is going to be the cliffs of Moher, County Clare. Right, very quickly on to our next one. These are easy, the bays and the headlands. So a bay is a large curved opening into the coast and the headland is the piece of hard rock jutting out into the sea, standing out into the sea. So how do they form? When there's bands of hard and soft rock along the coastline, the waves reach the coast and they erode the soft rock back faster, much faster than the hard rock. As a result of the soft rock being eroded back much faster, a large curved opening into the soft rock forms, and we call that a bay. The waves find it much harder and slower to erode down the hard rock, so the hard rock is left jutting and sticking out past where the soft rock used to be, and it's sticking and standing out into the sea. This hard rock sticking and jutting out into the sea is called a headland. Okay, so that's a bay and that's a headland, as you can see in the pictures there. Now, as we learned in class, just go back to one of the pictures there. If the headland is high and it's towering over the bay, as the waves come in, the headland, if they're very high, it slows down the waves and it shelters the waves as well from the wind. So the waves calm down and they get slow and small. So when the waves slow down, they stop and they deposit sand and shingle and anything that it's carrying. So they will deposit the sand and shingle and pebbles, etc., in the bay, and that will form a beach. Okay, so if the bay is very sheltered by the headlands at either side of it, a beach may form. So our examples would be Dublin Bay, Malin Head. You can use Kinmare Bay, Galway Bay, it doesn't matter. Okay, loads of examples. Mizzen Head, right? And on to the final landforms then. I'll just go to that picture there to summarise all of these. So you have a sea cave. What is a sea cave? A sea cave is a tunnel or a passage found at the bottom or the base of a headland. Okay, the headland is the piece of hard rock jutting out into the sea. So a cave, a sea cave, is a tunnel or a passageway that you find at the base or bottom of a headland. How is it formed? During stormy weather, destructive waves crash against the rock at the base of the headland. They attack the weak spot in the rock, which is the crack in the rock, through hydraulic action, compressed air. They keep eroding the rock until a tunnel or a passage forms, and that's called a sea cave. Okay, our example would be Hookhead in County Wexford. There's a sea cave there. You have sea caves in Ballybunion, for God's sake, you can use that too if you want. A sea arch then forms out of a sea cave. A sea arch is a tunnel that runs straight through a headland. So it's an archway or a tunnel that runs straight through a headland. So how is it formed? When erosion continues in the back wall of the sea cave. So as destructive waves continue to erode the back wall of the sea cave, they may erode straight through the headland to form a sea arch. Or it can form when two sea caves are sitting back to back in a headland and erosion happens straight through them. Again, a sea arch can be found in Hookhead in County Wexford. A sea stack forms from a sea arch. A sea stack is a pillar of rock that is standing out on its own out into the sea. It was once formed part of a sea arch. So how did it actually end up out on its own? As erosion continues, the waves continue to widen and erode the base of either side of the sea arch. So as you can see, at the bottom of the sea arch, at either side of it, the rock continues to be eroded by the waves. That widens the sea arch at the base of it. So obviously the top of the sea arch collapses in because there's nothing to support it anymore. And then it collapses into the sea, and that's called a sea stack. A sea stack can also be found in Hookhead in County Wexford. A sea stump is the sea stack that has been just eroded down over time. Okay? And finally, as you can see, the blowhole. A blowhole is a passage that links the roof of a sea cave to the surface of the headland or the cliff. How is it formed? When waves crash into the sea caves, air gets trapped inside the sea cave and it shatters the rock and the roof of the sea cave. Continuously over time, if this keeps happening, the rock will keep getting shattered on the roof of the sea cave until a tunnel or a passage has formed linking the roof of the cave to the surface of the headland. And that's a blowhole. Now our example of the blowhole was Downpatrick Head in County Mayo. Alright. Then after that we moved on to transportation. And transportation, we've done this a lot in class, it was very straightforward. As the waves come in to the coastline, they slow down. They deposit the material that they're carrying, okay? And if we just go back to the previous picture, Waves don't often come in straight into the beach. They come in at an angle because the wind is coming in usually from all different directions. So the wind blows in the waves at an angle. So the waves are arriving into the coastline at an angle. The swash drags the heavier and the lighter materials, so the pebbles and the light sand, up the beach, up the shore. And the backwash is a bit weaker, so it just drags the lighter sand particles back out to sea. So as you can see, the swash is coming up at an angle, backwash comes back down, swash, backwash, the movement of material up and down the coastline as it's being transported and deposited. That's just called longshore drift. Okay, right, so then we moved on and we finished up with landforms of deposition. So very quickly, what is a beach? A beach is an area, it's a build-up of sand and shingle found between low and high tide level. How is it formed? Exactly what I was just saying there about longshore drift. As the waves reach the coast, they break, they slow down, they deposit the material that they're carrying. The swash has more energy. It drags the heavier, coarser material, like pebbles, up the shore. And it also brings the lighter sand particles, the finer materials, up the shore too. But the backwash as it's going back out to sea is weaker, so it only drags the lighter sand, finer particles of sand back out towards the sea. Constant movement of the swash and backwash as it transports and deposits the lighter and the heavier materials up and down the shore forms a beach over time. If it's particularly stormy, the storm waves will have the power to hurl the heavier pebbles beyond the high tide level, and then you form a storm beach forms at the back, very, very back of the beach. Okay, so your example of a beach can be Inch in County Kerry, can be Ballybunion. All right, the sand dunes then, as you can see at the very, very furthest back point of the beach, are just hills or mounds of sand. Okay, how do they form? When the waves are coming in, when the wind, I should say, is blowing in over the sea or over the beach, the wind dries the sand. And when the wind dries the sand, it makes it very, very light. So often the wind can blow the sand in past the beach to the very, very back of it, okay, until it gets trapped by the wall. Like I said to you numerous times, the wall that meets the road or the wall that meets the car park. Hills of mounds of sand build up over time, and they're called sand dunes. And they often plant marram grass on them just to bind the sand down so it doesn't blow into people's land or car parks or businesses, okay? And sand dunes can be found in Inch in County Kerry as well. All right, and our final features then that we looked at were the sandbar, the sand spit, and the tombolo. So I'll just go through them very quickly in this picture here. So what is a sand spit? A sand... one second. Yes, the sand spit is what I want to start with. A sand spit is just a narrow ridge of sand or shingle that is connected to the land at one end and it sticks out across the bay. Okay? How does it form? When waves or longshore drift reaches the bay is sheltered, so the waves slow down and they deposit the material that they're carrying at the entrance, at the mouth of the bay. Eventually, this deposition of sand builds up across the mouth of the bay, and that's called a sand spit. If the sand spit grows in full length and extends across the mouth of the bay, the sand spit will form a sandbar. It seals off the mouth of the bay. Okay, so the sand spit is now fully, we'll say, built across, extends across the sand or the bay, and now it's called a sandbar. That traps the water in the bay. That's called a lagoon. And finally, then, a tombolo is a narrow ridge of sand or shingle that connects the mainland to a nearby offshore island. Okay, so how does it form? Longshore drift, the waves deposit material, deposit sand, deposition of sand builds up between the mainland and the island until a narrow ridge of sand or shingle forms. You can walk across that. It's a nice little way to connect to that little offshore island. And like I explained to you in class, people often build on that, build like literally towns and villages on it, depending on the material that it's built up of. Our example of the sand spit and the sandbar, our example of the sand spit, there's one in Inch in County Kerry. The sandbar, there's a lagoon, there's Ladies Island Lake in County Wexford, and the tombolo would be the Sutton Tombolo that links County Dublin to Howth Head. All right. Very, very quickly to finish up, and I know now you're probably had enough of this. I'm just going to fly through this, and I'll have done this in class with you as well by the time I meet you. How do we protect the coast from all of this erosion? Because like people live along the coastline. You don't want their houses to be gone. So is there anything that we can do? There is. You can build a concrete seawall. Okay, it costs money. It's a lot, but the government have it and they should do it. So you build a concrete seawall to protect the coastline from the waves. So the concrete seawall is taking the brunt of the erosion. Yeah, you may have to repair that after a number of years, but it's strong enough to take the brunt of the erosion. These concrete seawalls, if you can see in the picture, are curved. They're unusual looking. They're curved at the top, so they deflect the waves back out to sea. So that helps the coastline. It spares the coastline or houses from being eroded. You can also place a load of boulders, or they call them rock armour, at the base of the cliff in the headland or along the coastline or along sand dunes. The boulders of rock will take the brunt of the erosion from the waves. And you can build these walls. These are called groins. Groins are basically timber walls. Okay, they're often made of timber anyway because you want to be replacing them after a few years. So they're low walls, and they build them at intervals along the beach, and they trap the sand. They stop the sand from being moved, because often if you've got movement of sand, too much movement of sand, and your beach is being basically eroded, you're not going to attract visitors in the summertime. So it traps the movement of the sand and slows it down. The only thing I would say is they're very, very unsightly. I don't know whether they attract many visitors, to be honest. There's a closer look at them. Gabions then are very effective as well. Again, they're a bit unsightly, but they're wire cages, and you fill the wire cages full of stones and rocks. And again, you place them against the base of the headland or cliff or the sand dunes, and they take the brunt of the erosion by the waves. Okay, so you have got the seawalls, you have got the concrete seawalls, the gabions, the wire cages filled with stones. You have boulders, huge boulders of rock, or the groins, which are the low wooden walls. Okay, there's another great picture of the gabions. They kind of step them along the coast. All right, I hope that helps.